It's Friday, so that means we've got a full slate of college football to talk about with Mike Bernards on Inside the Numbers. Mike, Ohio State visits Penn State tomorrow. The Buckeyes 7-0, Penn State 6-1 got shellacked by Michigan. The Buckeyes coming in with C.J. Stroud, the number one rated quarterback in the nation, a Heisman front runner. The Buckeyes, though, need to be careful because they've had some sad times in Happy Valley, but they have won the last five in this series, 9 of the last 10. Bucks ranked number 2. Last week had no problem with Iowa at 54-10. And the Lions, they bounced back against Minnesota 41-17 after taking that blowout loss to Michigan. They're ranked 13th. They're still hanging on to hope, but not much hope in my opinion. Sean Clifford, he's a good quarterback, but he's not great, and he's kind of been playing that way all year. He's either been hot or cold.
Yeah, it seems like he's been there forever, and he's been a solid quarterback, but he's not Trace McSorley or any of the other great Penn State quarterbacks. Coach, Ohio State, they look like an unstoppable force through week 8. Same as they did in 2017. They started 4-0 that year. Their scores were 54-21, 56-0, 62-14, and 56-14. Then Penn State went into Columbus, and Ohio State escaped with a 1-point win. And then if we remember, the next week, once Ohio State saw that they weren't invincible, they went into Iowa and got drubbed 55-24. That one loss kept them out of the playoff. Really, it wasn't the loss. It was the margin of defeat. This year, though, Penn State does not look as strong and as capable as that 2017 Lions team. Still a tough spot for the Buckeyes. Penn State they've covered 5 of the last 6 in this series. I lean to them, but I just don't want to step in front of this Buckeye freight train right now.
Understandable. In the SEC tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central, it's Florida and Georgia in Jacksonville in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Mike, there's talk of moving this game to campus mainly because of recruiting. You're limited on what you can do with recruits if you're not on campus. But that would really, in my opinion, take away from the luster of this game. Georgia, even though it's played in Florida, only 90 miles from the Gainesville campus, Georgia owns a 53-44-2 lead in this series. Last year, it was 34-7 on their way to the national title. The Dogs, they've won 4 of the last 5, but the last 10, they've split 50-50, 5 wins apiece. Anthony Richardson, the Gator quarterback, outstanding athletic ability, just hasn't been able to translate that into consistent on the field performance. You see a flash of like, my gosh, how did he do that? And then it's followed by 4 or 5 series of, oh my gosh, why did he do that? So he's very inconsistent. A lot of talent, very inconsistent. Stetson Bennett, the walk-on that nobody wanted, he's got a national championship under his belt. He is playing with so much confidence, it's not even funny. When you look at these two teams from the start of the season to this point, the Dogs, they consistently gotten a little bit better week after week. The Gators haven't. The main thing I look at in this game is that Georgia defense. They're giving up 9 points per game. I don't care what your offensive lot is like in this day and age. If you're only giving up 9 points a game, you're not going to lose very many games.
No, and remember, last year's defense was arguably one of the best ever, if not the best. And then they go on, they lose dozens of players to the NFL and the transfer portal. And I'm thinking that first game, okay, they're going to need some time to adjust. And they drub Oregon, who's now, by the way, a top 10 team. Dogs range from a 22 to 23-point favorite in this game. The total is around 56. It's a big number, but the line is that high because the Gators' defense is a sieve. They give up 190 on the ground. That means they're getting beat physically. They gave up 45 points to LSU in the last game out. As you know, and our viewers know, I like to find value with underdogs, and I lean Gators here. But, Coach, Billy Napier gets a grade of C minus at best from me to this point. Florida scores a touchdown in that Tennessee game up in Knoxville, cutting the deficit to 11. That's pending the PAT, and he goes for two. And there's no logical explanation. And then on top of that, he doubles down after the game and he tried to refer to some imaginary metric or make believe analytics that do not exist. So it's hard to trust a coach with that logic or lack thereof here, but I still think the number's a little high.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the analytic book. It's funny. It seems like about every team that you watch on television, some point in the game, there's some nerdy looking guy over there with a flip book talking to the head coach about analytics, and you know some.
Well, Coach, I'll say this: there are true analytics, but what happens is the broadcasters and then the coaches they just use that as a crutch. Like, no, that's not what that wasn't analytics,
Yeah.
and so that's what the case was there. And there are some cases, especially on learning how to manage the time the clock towards the end of the game. But when they use it as an excuse, saying, "Oh yeah, well, remember it used to be, well, the book said we need to go for two."
Right.
And even when the book didn't say that.
Yeah. Well, and the book was written before the overtime was instituted. So you went for two based upon having to win the game. If you wanted to win the game and you were so many points behind or ahead, it was the book to go by. And then, of course, when overtime came in back in the late 90s, you could throw that book out the window because you didn't have to play for the win because all you needed to do was tie because you were going to get extra time to win the game. And again, I think coaches at this point in time, there are common sense things that you just always know to do. If you're up by 5, if it's in the fourth quarter, you go for 2. But you don't always go for 2 when you're up by 5. If you're early in the game, you're up by 5, you go for 1. You kick that thing because now you've got a 2 possession game. It may be 2 field goals, but it's still 2 possessions.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that we look at. You and I talk about this all the time. That there's sometimes where you just need to let common sense take over and do the right thing.
Right. And then the feel aspect comes in to where if you're in a situation like this is a little bit off, but remember when Alabama and Clemson played, and we haven't seen it before or since, but Nick Saban tried that onside kick, which is not by the book. It doesn't fit his style or philosophy, but he knew that he couldn't stop Deshaun Watson, and it paid off.
Moving on to tomorrow night's game, Kentucky at Tennessee. Mike, I think this could be a trap game for Tennessee if they're not careful. They've got Georgia next week. Luckily, they had Tennessee Martin after that emotional Bama game because it may have been trouble them playing Kentucky this past week, but they were able to play 1AA competition and kind of get the emotion of the big Bama win out of their system. The Cats, they started off at 4-0. They were ranked as high as number 7, but losses to Ole Miss and South Carolina kind of derailed them a little bit, but they got back on track by beating Mississippi State. They were open this past week, time to get healed up. Will Levis, he doesn't get a whole lot of pub, but listen, he personifies that Kentucky team. They're just very tough. They're very physical. Against Mississippi State, he goes into the locker room, gets a shot, comes back out, and plays the rest of the game. On the Vol side, they're still playing without Cedric Tillman. They've got him listed as questionable. I think they're trying to hold him out for the Georgia game. They don't want to risk anything in this game. I think that's one of the reasons that he actually didn't play in the Alabama game. This Vol defense, they're giving up more yards than Kentucky, but at the same time, they've played better competition overall.
Yeah, and I agree. This is a trap game scenario. Point plus, you have the point spread at 12 or 12 and a half. And when you see a college football line that sits at 12 or 12 and a half most or all of the week, you can play the dog blindly and you'll win 60+% of the time. The only other line that's close to that is 5 and 5.5. It has similar results, but not as good as a point spread of 12. With that said, This Tennessee team, they're first in the nation in scoring. They're putting up 50 a game. Hendon Hooker, I mean, he's the second choice to win the Heisman. He's been a nightmare for defenses. I'm going to hold my nose and go with the Wildcats here. The number says Kentucky. The only time they've lost by more than 2 scores in the last 22 games was a 17-point loss last season to the national champion Georgia Bulldogs.
Okay, let's move on to our picks of the week. We're 9-5 for the year. Mike, who you got this week?
Okay, going off the grid again, Middle Tennessee, UTEP, Conference USA for this week's free pick. This pick has a lot to do with perception. UTEP's been a doormat for much of forever. Middle Tennessee went down to Miami. They beat the Hurricanes by 2 touchdowns, and Middle Tennessee was a 25-point underdog in that game. But now you look at that Miami team, they're 3-4 straight up. They've only covered 1 game all year, meaning that they've underperformed. And they're coached by Mario Cristobal, who leads the world in poor game day decisions. So public remembers Blue Raiders win over Miami. UTEP's a small favorite here. The Miners, they're 3-0 at home, including a big win over the Broncos of Boise State. So I'm going to go with the UTEP Miners as my play this week.
You talked a lot about Miami in that segment. Well, they play into my pick of the week. They play Virginia at home. Tyler Van Dyke is out. I like Tony Elliott. He doesn't have a very good football team from a talent standpoint right now, but he's a very smart coach. They're well prepared, and they're playing hard for him. Miami is a 2-point favorite in this game, which, again, you may be able to understand why. I can't understand why, and especially with Tyler Van Dyke.
It's a perception, because if they don't make it that, then the public's going to lopside the game for the books.
And I look at this with Tyler Van Dyke being out, and to me, he was their offense, and when they had offense, he was it. I like Virginia at home, so I'm taking the Cavaliers over the Hurricanes.
I like it. We're probably going to be having to apologize to Miami fans or Cristobal because we just beat him up on our unintentionally on our pick of the week. But no, it's Miami's got a long way to go, and I like that spot, especially without Van Dyke, because he makes a lot happen for that team.
And Cristobal, we jump on him about some of his decisions, and justifiably so. However, he is a good football coach. He's a great recruiter. He's a great program builder. He just needs a handler for game day management, and just to have somebody in his ear saying, "Okay, coach, think about this, think about that," because we've talked about it before. They try to run out the clock in some games, and the clock's running, and they snap the ball with 20, 25 seconds left on the play clock.
Yeah, well, to your point, he can recruit. He can develop a culture, and has. He knows how to coach X's and O's, but he doesn't know when to take a knee. And again, it didn't cost him in that Virginia Tech game, but it was just crazy. You can't, you get people hurt, and what happened? People got hurt, and they won the game by 6 instead of 14. It didn't even it affected the point spread, but I didn't have a position in the game. I'm just watching it and it's over and over again, because when he was at Oregon, he didn't know when to take a knee, and it cost his team.
Okay, Mike, we appreciate your time as always on this Friday. You have a great weekend, and we'll catch up with you from Vegas early next week.
Yep, I'll get up early in Vegas Sunday morning, and look forward to it.